Hey, everyone. Welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. We've got a super awesome guest today. He is coming to us from the UK, I believe. He's a former digital strategy director at Landor and Fitch. He possesses more than 18 years of experience across Asia, America, the UK, the Middle East, and the Far East. And he's currently an associate principal of UX and CX. Let's welcome Daniel Segal. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, Thomas, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. You ready for 20 questions?
As good as I can be, yes.
Cool.
Brilliant.
Okay, number one, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What is it that you do?
Okay, so it's a very good question, really. I think over the time of what I've been doing, people have asked me, what is it you do? And I've said, I'm a UX designer, I'm a CX strategist. And everyone always scratches their head and goes, what is this? So I kind of break it down, depending on who I'm speaking to, and say, I'm a graphic designer. I'm an artist, I'm a strategist, I'm a researcher, I'm an observer. But really what it is I do is I try to help either companies and people navigate within systems or around products to help them understand, to improve on their business kind of processes or the strategic processes, their products, and try and simplify how to get from A to B. So whether or not that's looking at visual design, whether or not that's looking at customer journeys, user journeys, or specific areas of strategy for like value propositions, I tend to go in and do that for companies. Predominantly, over my kind of lifespan, I kind of started off more on the visual side, so it was really kind of visual design around user interfaces. But of course, over the years, it's kind of grown so that it's become more UX strategy driven. It's become more CX driven, and leading teams and building teams and helping teams grow into companies. When I started in the UX realm, this was a very new kind of era for many companies, and the maturity model on investment into UX and this kind of design thinking technology didn't really exist. So one of the big kind of things I did really was help to promote and drive the understanding within companies of why it's important to hire UX designers, why it's important to hire researchers and strategists within the projects that they're dealing with.
Nice, I like that.
Yeah.
Just for the audience real quick, Dan and I met years ago in Beijing at Lenovo, where we were both designers. I think we were the first two foreign designers in that department.
We were, Thomas. Yes, it was very scary, right? Back then, in a team of 150 people, that was just you and I. Brilliant.
Yeah, that was wild.
Couldn't speak a word of Chinese, and it was cold. I remember getting there actually, and I just come from Dubai, if I'm correct, and I think it was like 40 degrees plus from Dubai, and then I landed in Beijing, and it was minus 40 with the wind chill. So it was a real shocker to be there.
That's funny. Those are good memories. Number two, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
Yeah, I found this question quite tough to kind of to answer, really, because knowledge, I think, knowledge comes in all shapes and sizes. And so what is it that I have that makes a difference? And I think, going back, kind of looking into, kind of my history and where I came from, I started off in school. There was no computers, there were no like word processors were kind of only just kind of coming out to write your essays. But I think the biggest problem I had was I was dyslexic at school. And, being dyslexic and having dyslexia, not only, in written dyslexia, but also numerically dyslexic. I faced quite a lot of problems with things like the calculator at the time, mathematics, you know, and just kind of really understanding, you know, especially when you're stuck in a classroom and you have to read a book, you know, and being dyslexic, you can end up adding words or taking words away, or, you know, even kind of creating your own new sentences that didn't exist because of that hyper kind of tensions or hyper kind of ideations that are going on in your head when you have dyslexia. And I think, you know, the key piece that makes the difference is when you start to kind of understand what that is and how do you kind of go forward in controlling and measuring and, you know, really taking the time to understand what it is you're doing. And, you know, when I had to do, you know, my GCSEs and A levels, I had to take a lot more time. I had to read things over and over and over again and ask myself, do I understand this? Does this make sense? You know, and I think that trait has gone with me, you know, pretty much even to this day through my life, where, you know, I look at things differently. I look at things and question them differently. You know, does this make sense? Is this really what is being said to me? Is this really what is asked from me? And I think that knowledge of, you know, taking something like dyslexia, which, you know, back in the day, a lot of people frowned on it and called you dunce, or, you know, put you in the back of the class, you know, because they didn't understand what that is, you know, to now, you know, you're at the forefront of design and you're designing great customer experiences, great user experiences within the products, within interfaces. I think the dyslexia part and understanding that knowledge of what it really meant to have it and how to utilize it in a positive manner kind of really kind of brought that difference to me personally going forward. And there's a lot of people out there, you know, that have that same frustration and think, what can I do? You know, can I be an architect because I have, you know, numerically dyslexia maths? And knowing that is a positive as opposed to a negative is a key piece of knowledge to take forward and, you know, use as a weapon to actually go forth, you know, and excel in what it is you want to do.
That's great. I mean, I think that's going to be super motivating for some of our listeners for sure, and definitely hearing you be vulnerable is much appreciated. I mean, that's a part of what gets people really engaged in listening to you. So great, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, I mean, it's, don't get me wrong, you know, having that has, you know, especially in this day and age, you know, you are forced, especially in the bigger corporate companies, you are forced to do a lot more presentations and PowerPoints. And, you know, obviously with digital these days, you know, you can get away with not using the words and you can use your own self expressions and your own voice to get things across. But, you know, having to kind of conquer that, saying, well, you know, in a lot of the corporate companies where you do have to do a lot of PowerPoint presentations, knowing how to deal with that and how to structure them in a way, you know, that takes dyslexia, but yet still engages the audience in a very compelling way, is a very powerful tool to learn, you know, especially in UX when you're trying to get across your strategy or your value proposition and trying to ensure that, you know, you get the buy-in from the C-suite.
That's really, again, that's really inspiring. You know, I think towards the end of the episode, when you share out your ways of contacting you, I think some people are definitely going to want to do that and broaden this conversation. But that's a great topic.
For sure.
Yeah, number 3. So why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
That's again, I think, you know, these first 3 questions are probably the hardest ones. I have to be honest with you, Thomas. I don't think this is why I did what I did. I mean, again, I think because of, again, talking about the dyslexia, I was always driven to the visual. And I always seem to have a connection with expressing myself through illustration, you know, using my hands, you know, kind of like almost like what the Italians do when they talk, you know, they use their hands for gesturing and help and aid through conversation. And then, of course, I did, you know, my actual degree was in fine art sculpture. And I found, you know, at the time, obviously, like I said, there was no computers, there was no Macs, not like 83, I think it was. You know, but I found that there was, when UX came in, I found that there was a big kind of connection within the visual side, you know, typography, logo design with sculpture. And when you look at sculpture, you know, and you look at, you know, public sculpture and how those kind of like Henry Moore pieces of sculpture sit in a park and have this presence and yet attract, you know, people to come and play and touch and kind of get tactile with this piece of sculpture compared to what it's like when the piece of sculpture is in a gallery, you know, but yet it has this presence. Again, you take a Giacometti and you put it into, you know, the Whitworth Art Gallery, for example, in a white room, it becomes something very different. And again, then you have other kind of things such as like Rodin and the Kiss, and how close the two objects need to be next to each other so that there's tension between the two, but yet they're harmonizing. And I found that as I was progressing and digital started to kind of grow and the use of mobile phones and technology, I found there was a very big kind of connection between sculpture, presence, and touch and interaction, which led very nicely into kind of user interaction, you know. And a good example of that, I think, you know, was the very first kind of unlock screen from Apple, where it had this beautiful slide bar that kind of went halfway, but if you didn't go over it, then kind of like bounced back. And I just found those kind of things very similar to what you would be playing around with when you were at university doing the sculpture. And that kind of helped me to go forward and say, this conquers everything. You know, it conquered everything to do with how, you know, people interact with your work, how people look at your work, you know, how they share, how they interact, how they touch. And I just found that it literally was kind of just a natural progression to go from, you know, like I say, from what I did at university, you know, all the way through to getting into UX. And, you know, and bearing in mind that, you know, UX didn't exist when I was at college. This was something I had to pick up and learn myself. I didn't go to university and learn computer design. I didn't go to university and learn UX design because it just didn't exist. So it was a natural progression from what I would say, you know, from sculpture.
I can really relate to that. I went through foundation, like first year in art school, where we do a kind of dabble in all the different kind of artistic methods. And I remember spending a lot of time in the plaster room, which was completely covered with plaster. It was like completely white, covered with plaster. And, you know, you're inhaling plaster
Right.
in that room. I spent a long time in that room trying to get things right.
Yeah, no health and safety then, was there? Wearing the masks.
That's right. Okay, number 4. So what does your future look like?
Wow. Okay. Again, you know, if I had a crystal ball, I would kind of know, but I honestly, I don't know. You know, currently I've moved back to the UK after being away for so long. I've been, you know, as you mentioned earlier, I've been in, you know, the Middle East. I've been in Sri Lanka. I've been in Beijing. I've been in America. I've been in Canada, Hong Kong. And now I'm back in the UK. And and I've only been back in the UK 3 weeks. Did I think I'd be here? No, I didn't. So where will I be in the future? I really don't know, Thomas. I hope that I'm still doing what I'm doing. You know, I would like to move it forward for sure. You know, I'd like to go into, you know, kind of new areas and kind of look at new techniques and new strategies, especially with the way I think COVID has hit. You know, people are staying at home a lot more. They're dining at home a lot more. I think, you know, they're building, especially in the UK, you see a lot of people building extensions to their homes because they've realized how important their homes are and their gardens. You know, and I kind of I've always kind of been hands-on, like I mentioned, and I think maybe the future has something to do more with home, to help people in homes, to help people get around and not be isolated from others. And yet, you know, and at the same time have a sense of something new to them, or something that has, you know, grown from, it's not just my home, it's an area of tranquility, and how can digital or UX, CX kind of help people understand or get to that. But I don't know where I will be in the future, and I don't know where I'll be or what I'll be doing within the realms of UX in the future. I just feel that, like I say, I think it might be something more home-based we need to be looking at.
I remember at Lenovo, for part of my job, I was working on future focused products. And, you know, as designers, I wonder if we are more well equipped to look at the future because of projects like that. But yeah, definitely it's a hard one to answer. You know, are we going to be on Mars or not? I wonder.
It's difficult. I think even with the amount of research you do, you know, you can look at where you can try to project where, you know, corporate companies are going to be, where automotives are going to be, you know. But again, did we think someone was going to be on the moon? You know, Richard Branson, you know, and he's now going to do, you know, public flights to the moon. It's so hard to kind of predict where the future is going to go. It hasn't taken long, really, has it, since the, you know, Nintendo 64 came out, and or the Commodore 64, and now, you know, look where we're at PlayStation 5 and VR and, you know, Microsoft Mesh and so forth. So it's a very hard to try and really predict where we're going to be going forward, and how we're going to communicate and do business.
I always get a kick out of the tech companies releasing their new logos, and I look at the shape of it and I'm like, I saw that in a book somewhere, you know, like when I was studying design, you know, that's straight out of history, you know.
Yeah.
So often the future kind of jumps on that in a way.
Well, I think, you know, again, I think if you look at a lot of the Chinese market, and without getting political, of course, but, you know, sometimes some of the best things are things that are already around us. And it's a case of finding something that works really well and then making those adjustments. It's not about recreating the wheel. It's about, how do I improve the wheel? You know, how do I, you know, get more traction? And I think, you know, China does this very well. You know, some people I'm sure will disagree with me, but at the same time, they're taking things that, you know, do work, but they are making it better. So sometimes simplicity, adding that certain simple function can change a product overnight and make it sensational just by that one piece of extra bolt-on, should we say.
Not to kind of overburden this topic, but I remember at Lenovo working on some drag and drop functions for mobile phones. And, you know, those kinds of functions just didn't exist yet. And, you know, we were trying to implement them in part, you know, copying, but in part being inspired by the possibilities, I think.
Yeah, I think that Lenovo was a great.
Lenovo is a great example for sure. Yeah. So number 5, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Sorry, Thomas.
Oh. Hello, hello.
Hello, sorry, yes, sorry, Thomas, I'm still here.
Okay, great. So number 5 is let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
I think place is really important. And I think in some of your earlier podcasts, you know, there was a few guys also talked about this. The way I look at place, I think there's 2 aspects to it, really. Place in a work situation, and there's place for, you know, well-being and being, you know, by yourself and so forth. So I think when I think of where I've traveled, you know, I remember being in Sri Lanka a long time ago, and there was a department store called Odell's. And they offered me a job. I was on holiday actually there, but they knew I was around, and they said, well, can I come in? It was Christmas time, and help the guys and help them understand, you know, what a Christmas catalog should be, you know, because they weren't aware of like the Christmas tree and the bulbils and the glitter. So their Christmas catalog didn't look very festive. So I think place, it's really important, because not only can you teach people in places about, you know, your type of culture, you know, where you've come from, what you do, and the level of should we say execution and design should be. But at the same time, they also teach you, about their communities. They teach you, how to listen. They teach you how to be aware and understand, and they also teach you a lot about cultural differences. Again, you can take the Middle East as a good example. We had one colleague a while back, and it was Valentine's Day. And so again, one of the hotels was promoting Valentine's Day. It was like buy one and get one free. And the photographer came in to take all the photos. And of course, some of the photos that he took, there was bottles of champagne on the table. And of course, there was, there was a couple across the table being quite tactile. Now, in the Western world, this would be absolutely fine. But of course, in the Middle East, alcohol theoretically is illegal, in that situation. And certainly that type of form of affection, if you're not married, definitely shouldn't be on the front cover of any hotel. So again, knowing these culture transitions and what is acceptable in the cases of design is really important. And then, again, going into like China, how they write the typography, which you're very aware of, where we write something, like close, or tap to close on an interface, it fits very nicely into that kind of, design, while as it might only be 2 letters in China. And therefore, the whole design completely kind of doesn't work. The whole thing no longer has this beautiful composition. So place, I think, is a really kind of interesting thing for any designer, to go out and explore. And then when I talk about place kind of, as an individual, I think, in this dynamic world, in this whole sense of well-being, the anxiety, I used to suffer from anxiety, and the pressures of trying to get the work out on time, or to, because you've got to meet a product deadline, or because your client is constantly asking for updates. You need to also find a place, and that might not necessarily be a place on earth. That might be somewhere that only you go to, sitting, reading a book, and just drifting off to. So I think, the place has an important role to play, not only, like I say, on how you deal with culture and cultural differences, but also how you kind of get through the day in one piece. So it's one of the most important parts for me. And I love it. I love travel, and I love traveling in my own mind, hence why I ran across the desert just to get into my own special place.
I like that response a lot. In 2019, I gave a TEDx talk about airports, and in a way about airports as places. And it's super interesting for me to hear your views about the culture and place. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great talk that, Thomas. It was really good.
Great, thanks. Yeah, number 6. If you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
I would probably tell myself not to think I was stupid. Because of the dyslexia, it played a real big impact on me, that, Thomas, to the point where, don't get me wrong, I was adventurous, and I got into what I got into. But, at one point I wanted to be an architect, but then, I was told I was too stupid. I was sitting at the back of the class. I got into a lot of trouble. And it was because I didn't believe in myself. And I think that would be the one thing, I would probably go back to and say, you can do this, believe in yourself, you're not stupid. This is something that a lot of people have. Don't be alone, don't be afraid, speak up. And I think that would be the one advice I would go and seek more help for something that I knew was frustrating and I couldn't deal with alone.
It's interesting, your career is so successful in so many ways, and to hear of your difficult beginnings and to see where you've gotten to now is really makes you wonder, could there have been more? Should there have been more? I mean, you've succeeded in kind of every kind of metric. So, how would that work? How would that have changed things?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? And this is why these questions have been quite difficult. But then who knows? Maybe UX wouldn't have existed. We just don't know. So, and it is what it is.
Great. Okay, 7. What's a day in your life like?
Okay, day in my life. So, wow, depending on where I am and where I've been. So, if I was still in Hong Kong, day in my life would be kind of getting up in the morning, walking my dogs, kind of getting myself together, kind of reiterating in my mind, what do I have on today? Kind of what meetings do I have on? What needs to be done? What needs to be kind of checked upon? And then just going to kind of go forth and do the mundane office job, I suppose. But then at the same time, you never know what's going to happen when you get into the office. So that it could end up being a workshop. It could end up being, a 3-hour-long meeting just to try and explain something. So it was never kind of that predictable, but you kind of had a framework of how your day was structured, especially on a level where you've got a team of people that are underneath you. Pretty much after work, that would be going to somewhere like the pub, go and get a drink, go and chill out, get the frustrations off, talk about the day, and then, go back out for a walk with the dogs again, and just clear the mind and kind of get ready for the next day. So Hong Kong was a little bit conveyor belt like, if like that. While as, I don't know, I'm not promoting China, Beijing was very different. You never really knew what was happening half the time. If the meeting was going to be in English, was the meeting going to be in Putonghua? Everything just kind of became dynamic. But usually, when you're working for the corporate levels, and at those certain levels, you would have your calendar booked in. You'd pretty much know what your meetings were going to be, and what you needed to do. So pretty much that would be like my normal day, really, just kind of, I suppose, stuck or a slave to the calendar, which I didn't necessarily really enjoy. Hence why I'm now back in the UK, and looking for that kind of change, where I think COVID has hopefully brought some of that in with this new hybrid way of working, and digital has done that as well. So yes, you will still have meetings, but I'm hoping that there'll be more diverse. There'll be more diversity, and it's not as mundane, as kind of just preparing a PowerPoint presentation for the next meeting.
I like your answer a lot. It reminds me of Lenovo in Beijing, kind of getting thrown into a meeting and doing some work and not really knowing if it was working or not, and then kind of going into presentations and doing a presentation and not really knowing if it landed well or not.
Right.
I guess that kind of ambiguity is part of everybody's day, but I especially know what that's like.
Yeah, and I think that's probably, and I hope I'm fair to say this, I think, being in the Far East, there's a lot more of that kind of level of work, especially with the older companies, the more legacy-based companies, while as, at the same time, you've got a lot of the new dynamic companies like Landor and Fitch that you mentioned, that aren't like that. There is a lot more going on, a lot more kind of, I don't know what the word is, but kind of pivoting on the spot, a lot more kind of design thinking and, experimental kind of days. Sure, there's always that director level that has that day planned out, but certainly for the designers, 1 minute they could be working on this project, the next thing they could be working on something completely different that would help, upgrade their skills.
Great. Okay. Number 8 is lifelong learning is a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
Wow. Okay. So I think a lot of that really is down to, I used to hire people at work. And a lot of that was also about how I learned. I'm a big believer that, that I don't know everything. It's no one can. So for me, especially when hiring people, it's always good to have someone who brings something to the table that you definitely don't have. Maybe it's a skill, again, that I've managed to find in people through looking at their CVs or their portfolios. So, I would take a risk on hiring someone that doesn't do what I do, or is weaker than what I do, or they come from a different kind of background to maybe somebody else, just to bring that, that extra edge to, or that kind of outward thinking knowledge, and experimentation into the work. So that's kind of one way. Hiring, like I say, hiring somebody or who's just out there, who's an out of the box thinker. Of course, there's also all the other channels. You read the magazines, the TEDx stuff. You read the Twitters. But I'm also I'm a big gamer. I love playing games. I used to love playing on World of Warcraft, and I play on the VR. And I believe the gaming industry brings a lot of great design and a lot of cutting edge technology into play. So kind of keeping up onto the latest games and the latest kind of technology that's being used to render those visuals, and how those visuals are made, bringing in the physics engines into how the cloak sways in the breeze, even though there is no breeze in your TV. I just believe that is another great way of keeping up. So apart from the everyday ways, I think it's really people, and gaming for me, that kind of keeps me up to date with what's going on, because it's just at the forefront.
Great. Just about halfway here. So number 9, tools. Are you more digital? Do you incorporate any analog? Are you a bit of both?
Yeah, so I'm at everything. I don't believe one tool has the answer to everything, because you just don't know what you need. You look at research, for example, there is nothing better than shadowing someone. And if you're shadowing someone for the day, it's not so simple to pull out your iPad and start writing notes. You might do it visually, so you might end up taking photographs, no problem. While as if you're in a white room and you're doing, brainstorming, certainly writing analog on a whiteboard, getting the ideas down, is so much quicker and easier, certainly for myself, to do that. So yeah, I'll use a bit of everything, really. Anything that I feel is appropriate for that situation and where I'm at. Weather can be a big play. The office where you're at, you might not have a whiteboard. So in other words, pen and paper, by all means do that. Again, you're in a meeting. So I'm, like I say, I was dyslexic, so, and I still am, so sometimes I record meetings, I record things that are going on, so that I can then play them back and listen to them and so forth. So I recommend, everybody should, have an arsenal of, of digital and tools. Use the tools that help you do the job. It's simple as that.
Nice. I'm excited for this next question and for your particular answer on it, because of Hong Kong and how Hong Kong fits into this. But the question is, how do you deal with a work-life balance?
Yeah, so that became quite difficult. I've got to be honest, Hong Kong, because how you live in Hong Kong, the houses are very small. There's a lot of people crammed in, so, and of course, financially, yes, it's a very wealthy country, but a lot of people don't necessarily, earn millions. So, and they live, they live with their grandmas, they live with their granddads, they live with their mum, their dads, and their brothers and sisters. So for them, being in Hong Kong, sometimes being in the office is that work-life balance. It doesn't really exist, because in the office, they get the computers, we've got the air conditioning rooms, you get a meal, you can get a takeaway. So really, it's more, the office becomes more like an extension of their home. So, there's that work-life balance, but then of course, so that really, life and work become the same. But of course, there's always that, how do I turn my computer off? And that really is, again, with the Hong Kong spirits, the hiking, and just really kind of getting into that special place, whether or not you're going hiking, you're going stand-up paddle boarding, or whether or not you're going shopping. It's really important that you do turn it off. And again, in Hong Kong and many countries, especially China, it's important to be around family, and it's important to turn that computer off and get back to kind of, being around people and interacting with people, and not just digital. And I think, and shutting down, if you don't, the battery drains very quickly in these kind of fast, dynamic paced countries.
I've seen your social posts, you've been running across the desert. Do you want to talk about that? Does that tie into work-life balance at all?
It did. So I was very, I mean, everyone thought I was mad, and I probably am mad, to be honest. So I ran the Marathon des Sables in 2018, which is a self-supported race. You carry your own food. The water is rationed. It's through the Sahara Desert. In fact, it's classed as the toughest foot race on the planet. And it's 250 kilometers. And I just needed to get away. Yeah. I was very happy with where I was working, but at the same time, the idea, that I could, I couldn't take anything digital with me, because you have to consider the weight on day one. And if you've got a 10 kg backpack, there is no internet out there. There are no mobile phones. It's literally you and the desert. And you have to run 50 kilometers pretty much, 30 kilometers, then 50 kilometers. And then on the long stage, it's 100 kilometers, and you have to cook and so forth and so on. So for me, it was a real kind of great way to kind of just take a step back from where I was, from, being so engaged in the digital world, and corporate businesses, and kind of forgetting about who I was and what I wanted, and what is it that drives me forward, and it changed my life, to be honest. It made me come back and question, how much time do I want to spend digitally? So from there, I realized I enjoyed spending more time listening to people, and kind of listening to myself and understanding myself, to go back and change my persona and my behavior within the actual working environment.
Nice. Number 11, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what would you be doing?
I'd probably be a gardener. I don't know. I'd like to think I'd be a gardener. Maybe I'd be a sculptor. I was very, like I say, I was always very hands-on in design and fine art. So I'd like to think that, yeah, maybe I could have been a landscape designer. Something I'm very passionate about now. And I think I mentioned it earlier, something I believe, everybody's entitled to have that beautiful sweet spot in their homes. So probably a landscape designer.
Nice. Number 12. So you were talking about kind of doing a bit of everything, but what would you not like to do, like specifically career-wise?
What would I not like to do? So I've got to be honest on this one, Thomas. I don't think there's anything I wouldn't like to do, because I believe that, how can I possibly say I wouldn't like to do it if I haven't done it? And I think it's really important that, you put yourself, as Gandhi says, don't judge someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes, and so I'm a big believer that, have a go at anything. It might not be for you, it might not be suited for you, but I cannot say that I wouldn't want to do it. Like I say, I mean, I might enjoy the jobs that I've never done before, because it maybe gives me that sense of freedom. But if I haven't done it, how would I know?
I guess, yeah, with the current climate and the idea of imposter syndrome and how that's kind of okay, I guess the common way is to just embrace everything, isn't it?
I think so, and certainly for a UX designer, or a customer experience strategist, you kind of need to know what everyone does. So therefore, you should be kind of having a go at what they do, because if you don't, how can you design for it?
13. What's your favorite word, quote, or sentence?
I would say, go forth and conquer. I just think it's a very powerful phrase, to go forth and conquer. I find it a very positive word, a sentence, phrase.
Least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
My least is, I'll do it later. I don't like the word later. When I say I don't like it, it's because I don't understand what the word later means. Is it now? Is it in 5 minutes? Is it in 10 minutes? Is it next year? When is later? So when someone says to me, I'll do it later, it's not a positive kind of, it's not a positive response to a question.
If you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would you choose?
Oh gosh, I could. There's so many. I'm going to just say adventurous on
Nice.
this one.
What keeps you up at night?
Luckily, not much, except my dog's barking when a squirrel runs past the window. Not much. I like to think that when I go into bed, you know, I can do the breathing techniques and I can kind of say, yeah, I know what I have to do tomorrow. I know where I'm at. And therefore, you know, without this 8 hours sleep, I'm not going to, you know, be able to perform the next day as well as I'd like. So, you know, I really try to make sure I go to bed with a clear mind, knowing that everything I've done today is the best I can do to give me a good start for tomorrow.
What's a dream you're chasing?
Dream I'm chasing. I think I'm just chasing to be me, to learn more about myself. You know, kind of figuring out where do I, like you mentioned in the question, where do I see myself in the future? You know, what is that dream? Where do I want to be? And, you know, I still don't know that answer. So, you know, I wouldn't say I'm chasing it. I'd say I'm kind of learning it every day. So, yeah, I'm not really chasing any dream.
That's a good response. I haven't heard people kind of focus inwardly like that for a while. So it's good. Final stretch here, number 18. What inspires you?
People inspire me, all types of people. I love, you know, I love speaking to so many people about their lives, what they're doing, how they interact with things, where they've been, where they've gone, what they've learned, how they grown up, what their job's about. I find, you know, for me, people is the most inspiring. Listening to people, you know, understanding people, and yeah, just people really inspire me the most.
19. Advice you'd like to share?
Don't be afraid, you know, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to try something. You know, I think Yoda once said, do or do not, there is no try. I'm not quite sure about that, because you should do it, you should not do it, but it's always go and try something. You never know unless you try it. So yeah, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to chase, you know, to chase what you're after. And like I say, don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it.
And I think you've kind of built up this question a lot. I think we're probably all anticipating this, but how can our listeners keep tabs on you? How can we find you? How can we see what you're doing?
So I thought about this, and then I asked myself, I thought, my gosh, you know, I don't really use Instagram. But yeah, I mean, the normal channels. So you've got all the Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. But predominantly, yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out to me on Twitter. You know, and if you're in the UK, invite me to the pub. I'll come to the pub and have a nice cold beer with you, or, you know, a nice coffee or whatever. You know, we'll go and grab lunch. But that's really the best way. As much as I do use digital channels, I'd rather meet people face to face. If you're in the area or you'd like to invite me to, you know, I'd be more than happy to have a Zoom call with you, but I'd rather have conversation than just post irrelevant tweets for the sake of it.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Daniel. I mean,
Thank
it's
you, Thomas.
so great to, you know, hear about your desert running and living around the world, and your huge wealth of knowledge in UX. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, what else can I say? That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
My pleasure.